This is Bold Dominion, an explainer for state politics in a changing Virginia. I'm Nathan Moore. We started this show early last year, not too long after a blue wave hit the Virginia legislature. The state government flipped to Democratic control after years of Republican majorities in both the state Senate and the House of Delegates. It felt like a progressive moment, something worth documenting and exploring. The Old Dominion was clearly changing, but our big question was, how much? Well, last Tuesday, June 8th, was the Democratic primary for statewide offices, and the results might help answer that question. Quick recap of last week: former Governor Terry McAuliffe handily beat out progressive challengers Jennifer Carroll Foy, Jennifer McClellan, and others to win the nomination for governor. State Delegate Hala Ayala won a crowded field for nomination for lieutenant governor, and incumbent Attorney General Mark Herring beat out a primary challenger. Around the state, outspoken delegates Lee Carter, Mark Levine, and Ibrahim Samirah failed to win their bids for renomination. All in all, a fairly clean sweep for the Democratic establishment, led by former Governor Terry McAuliffe, with several progressive candidates losing out to their more moderate or corporate-friendly challengers. So what happened to Virginia's progressive moment? Has the state already reached a new equilibrium in the post-Trump era?
At the end of the day, candidates like Governor McAuliffe and Mark Herring won, and that's not really a huge surprise. Of course, they brought in large treasure chests and, of course, the power of the incumbency. So I don't think it was necessarily a referendum on any one brand of politics as much as a consequence of how campaigns work and don't work.
That's Brennan Gilmore. He's the executive director of Clean Virginia, a social welfare organization dedicated to fighting the influence of utility monopolies in Virginia politics. In the second half of this episode, Brennan will discuss what last week's results mean for Clean Virginia and progressive organizations like it, especially when it comes to the question of corporate campaign donations. But first, let's go deeper into last week's Democratic primary. What's it mean for the average citizen like you or me here in Virginia? I sat down with friend of the show and Richmond-based journalist Peter Galaska. Well, Peter, we had the Democratic primary for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, as well as all the state House of Delegates races around the state last Tuesday. There's, I think, looking at the results, one of the frames that I immediately think of is what happened to Virginia's progressive moment. There had been a lot of commentary over the last several years about Virginia's turn left. You and I have talked a number of times about the bluing of Virginia and the demographic changes driving that. But I'm wondering, looking at these results, if it was actually a turn left. So why don't you take me through what actually happened, who won, and let's go from there.
Okay, well, obviously for governor, Terry McAuliffe, the former governor, won the nomination again, and he's the epitome of the establishment Democratic Party of Virginia. And he beat out. He won with 62% of the vote, which is really pretty significant.
In a field of 5 candidates, yeah.
Right, and the runner-up was Jennifer Carroll Foy, who had 20% of the vote, and she's a young, energetic, capable African-American politician. He also beat out Jennifer McClellan, who is much like Foy, and they were both seen as maybe a new wave. But I think that what's interesting, at least on the governor's side, is that it is, a stretch to the moderate. But as far as the moderates prevail, I think there's a certain argument you could make that you need to backpedal a little bit because you're facing Glenn Youngkin, who is very rich, and he had a kind of a spectacular win at the GOP convention. And he's very Trump-like. He's not 100% clear on his positions, but he's Trump-like. And when I've heard him speak, he definitely wants to go into things like election changes. So if he becomes governor, you might end up with some kind of, Texas or Georgia style disenfranchising of minority voters, the way they're doing down there. Also, you'd see a pullback in gay and women's rights. You'd see changes in education, banning critical race theory. And I think a lot of Democrats said, wait a minute, we can't let that happen. So who has the best name recognition? That's McAuliffe.
I mean, this is going to be a big money race, and it seems like the Democratic voters in this primary chose McAuliffe certainly for name recognition, but also, what I actually heard from some people was like, look, it's going to be a pound the fight with money, and Youngkin has said he'll put in, $20-30 million of his own money. McAuliffe doesn't have that kind of personal wealth, but he has those kind of connections. I mean, is this just sort of like hey, let's fight fire, or money in this case, with more money.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think it's true. For one thing, don't forget McAuliffe has been really big in the Democrat National Committee, and he is a master fundraiser. He's in the mold of the Clintons. He's very close to them, and he really can raise money for himself, for his campaigns, and also for the National Party. Glenn Youngkin is worth, I guess, I've heard estimates of up to $300 million. And there's been stuff in the press where he might even give himself $75 million just for his campaign.
Getting back to kind of the Democratic Party piece of this, looking at McAuliffe, I interviewed him going into the primary season, and he basically was trying to frame himself as, look, I'm actually pretty progressive, y'all. It's like, remember when I was in office, I was up against Republican majorities in the House and the state Senate. And so now with the Democratic majorities, I'll be doing great. How much do you buy that?
Well, I don't know. He's kind of a slippery eel type guy. It's like frisking a seal, because he'll say one thing. He really touts his jobs, attraction thing. And I did a piece for the Post just after he left office, saying, well, and I looked at how many jobs are created under a number, maybe 5 governors, and he was really in the middle. And he did have some problems, though, because where he failed was action. It wasn't really his fault, but he wanted to expand Medicaid, mostly on the federal dime, to 400,000 needy Virginians. And he was blocked completely for 4 years, maybe, by Republicans in both the House of Delegates and the Senate. And so he was up against the wall there. But he did do some things. I mean, he did restore rights to felons who had been served their sentences. And he did play a role in attracting Amazon for its second headquarters up in Northern Virginia. And he did kind of push a number of things that haven't really coming to fruition, or have actually after he left. I mean, that's something the Post said in the progressives are winning the war. In that, what do you have since McAuliffe left office? You've gotten rid of the death penalty, which is huge. You've got voter restrictions, laws that will stop, efforts to restrict voting. And those are pretty progressive ideas. So it could be the idea is to run McAuliffe now, get him in office, blunt Youngkin, and then in the next 4 years, you can go to the more progressive candidates. I mean, maybe that's naive, but that seems to be the plan.
I don't know if it's beneficial to think too hard about political culture of a given state or a given community, but there is something to be said about how things tend to work in a particular place. In Virginia, I feel like the political culture is very polite, and even though we've talked about kind of like the old Virginia way not being the dominant thing like it used to be, there's still a lot of that. Let's kind of get along and not veer too far from whatever the middle happens to be right now. I mean, is that accurate?
I think that's true. Although I do think in Virginia that it's changing. The idea, if you want to call it a conceit, that we're Virginia gentlemen and gentlewomen is kind of falling away because of, people from other parts of the United States and other countries are coming in. They're not necessarily rude people at all, but they don't know that experience, that kind of, idea that, we're supposed to be nice people. And I'm not saying they're not, but that's kind of, I think over time that's dying away. And it used to infuriate me because, I worked in New York too. And in Virginia, they would smile and stab you in the back. In New York, they'd frown and stab you in the chest. So, that's the way it is. But in many ways, I preferred New York because at least I know where I stand.
Right. I was talking with Jeff Thomas last summer, author of The Virginia Way, Democracy and Power after 2016. And his take on some of this is that, those old family dynasties in Virginia where the Virginia gentlemen, the Virginia gentlewomen, and the sort of personal relationship gets everything done, some of that has eroded away for sure. And now it's money. And there's newcomers, and the way you play the game is with money. And so I'm kind of struck by that as a change in the political culture here, but it still seems to veer really hard toward a sensibility that Virginia doesn't want to be the first on anything, but it would be impolite to be the last on anything.
Well, Virginia runs sort of in the middle. But I do think that there are some things where Virginia, vis-a-vis the South, is ahead, such as marijuana, decriminalization, and getting rid of the death penalty. And that's where Virginia's moving, that kind of area. It's not going to be, it used to be like the a political museum piece, as a famous historian put it, where it's sort of, it's changed. I mean, that was written, 60, 70 years ago? So.
Yeah. So the sense that now Virginia is kind of maybe middle of the pack in the country, but certainly kind of leans sort of left, center or center left compared to the rest of the South.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at parts of the South have gone nuts, like Georgia and like Texas. I mean, it's just really kind of shocking.
Even some of the last governor in North Carolina was pretty out there.
Right. Yeah, really. I mean, and I spent some time in North Carolina too. I had my first job there in a newspaper. And so, but we'll see. I don't know. I do agree that there's a sense of place. And that's in many ways another reason why Virginia in its off-year election is getting a lot of national attention. McAuliffe's win was noted in major articles in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and other places. I think even the British media got into it. And because it's sort of a bellwether for whether the Trumpists will make a big run, in 2022 and 2024.
Yeah.
And seeing this as a bellwether.
Well, and Virginia was a bellwether, 4 years ago as well, when, the House of Delegates flipped, the Ralph Northam was elected as governor. I mean, Virginia is only 1 year out from these presidential elections. And so in a lot of ways, we end up in this kind of awkward situation where we're a bit of a, kind of a test run for the next year ahead.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of true. And in many other ways, too. And another thing that happened was that two, very, not progressive, but certainly more moderate women won Congress, and that would be Abigail Spanberger and Elaine Luria of down in Virginia Beach. And ironically, Spanberger is interesting because she kind of came off as a bit, progressive, but then she changed her tune when she got into Congress. She became much more moderate. And, there's this kind of play that's sort of, kabuki theater that goes on, especially among Democrats, where they're coming off this way for now as progressive, but they're really going to be moderate. Or they're coming off as moderate to get elected, and then all of a sudden they turn more progressive in office. Mm-hmm. And I haven't quite figured that out yet. I don't know.
Yeah, it's political calculations that go into their jobs every day, I suppose. I saw at VPAP, the Virginia Public Access Project, that the turnout this year for the gubernatorial election was down 17% from 4 years ago. That tells me that at least 1 in 6 of those people who turned out last year just weren't engaged this year.
I've seen that too. I've seen a story, I think it was in the Bull Elephant, which is a conservative blog, that there was a especially low turnout in small localities. I mean, really down in the primary.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just political fatigue or that everybody just knew that McAuliffe was going to win, at least a nomination. And so, and I think a lot of it is just exhaustion. People are so sick and tired of what's happened in the last, 4.5 years.
So it's kind of like there was this infusion of energy for a year or two, maybe 3, and now it's just kind of defaulting back to sort of what was normal before politically.
Well, I don't know. It depends on how temporary this is, whether something fires people up again. And, Youngkin is kind of strange because, his background is in private equity with a huge company called the Carlyle Group in D.C. And they do global stuff, or did global stuff. He's no longer with them. But, and that's a really white shoe, top of the line firm. He was the CEO. And he's never had any political experience. And now he's just sort of coming across as a highly successful, rich businessman who's practically going to buy the election for himself if he can. And that's really different from somebody like Trump, who is, a lot of failed things going on there,
So looking ahead, what do progressives do next? I mean, you mentioned a Washington Post piece where they said that the writer of that piece said that moderates won this election, but progressives are winning the long game. How is that the case?
Well, I think what's happening is that you're seeing things that I would never have seen, or never imagined having seen, maybe 5 years ago, and certainly longer than that. It's basically you're seeing things such as you've got the death penalty gotten rid of that. You've decriminalized marijuana. You've gotten the basis of a law to protect voting rights. And
even an increase in the minimum wage, right?
Yeah, minimum. Oh, yeah, I forgot that. That's an important one too. And kind of trying somehow to buttress, public workers, unionization rights. And these would have been non-starters. Now they are starters. And so, you got to, go against tactics versus strategy. The tactics are, okay, you got this problem, this post-Trump problem, and McAuliffe is probably has the name recognition, the money, it's that, to blunt that. But the mentality, the overall strategy, the philosophy has become more progressive. No question about that. I mean, I was kind of interested in seeing either Miss Foy or Miss McClellan win. Hopefully, we'll come back in the future. I doubt McAuliffe can or will run for a third term. If you think of it as a long-term process, the move is still in the right direction.
Peter Galaska is a journalist based in the Richmond area. Stick around. In the second half of this episode, we're talking to Clean Virginia's executive director, Brennan Gilmore. You're listening to Bold Dominion, a state politics explainer for changing Virginia. Visit us online at bolddominion.org. Have a friend who's trying to figure out Virginia state politics? Well, tell them about this show, and then subscribe in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever fine podcasts are served up. And while you're there, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review. We love those. Bold Dominion is a member of the Virginia Audio Collective, online at virginiaaudio.org. Check out all the podcasts from the collective, including Teachers in the Movement. It's a new podcast that features the voices and stories from educators who taught between 1950 and 1980 throughout the South. It highlights how their education work was an instrumental form of activism that influenced the civil rights movement. Listen to hear some practical advice and ideas today for teachers, parents, and citizens who want to talk about race and democracy. That's Teachers in the Movement. You can listen and subscribe at virginiaaudio.org. So earlier in this episode, Peter Galaska gave us a solid overview of the Democratic primaries last week. But what did last week's results mean for activists on the ground, trying to create systemic changes in the Commonwealth? For the second part of this episode, Bold Dominion producer Aryan Balu talked with Brennan Gilmore. He's an activist, organizer, and the executive director of Clean Virginia, which works to reduce the influence of corporate money in Virginia politics.
I think, a good, healthy primary is a great thing for a party. And I think for the past 6 months and longer, we had a very competitive cycle where you had a lot of different and diverse voices contributing to the agenda and to what the Democratic Party would be running on and governing on in the years to come. And so, watching this process play out, it was, I think, a very healthy development. At the end of the day, candidates like Governor McAuliffe and Mark Herring won, and that's not really a huge surprise. Of course, they brought in large treasure chests and, of course, the power of the incumbency. So I don't think it was necessarily a referendum on any one brand of politics as much as a consequence of how campaigns work and don't work. But Clean Virginia supported at the statewide level Delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy for governor and Delegate Jay Jones for attorney general. And we're very proud to be able to help support their voices. I think they really drove the conversation in a lot of ways through the primary process, and will continue to be leaders in this space in the months and years to come.
Right. So could you actually walk me through what specifically went into those endorsements, the decision-making process?
Well, we look at a lot of things when we're looking at candidate endorsements. First and foremost, we look at a track record and the way that they legislate and campaign that would suggest that they're not beholden to utility monopoly influence. We look particularly at whether they have taken money from Dominion Energy and whether they have been leaders in a cleaner and more transparent government in Virginia. Both Jennifer Carroll Foy and Jay Jones have been just that. If you look at their legislative record, the way they've campaigned and the voice that they have brought into the space, they have been very much leaders of crafting a new Virginia way, and one that's not putting corporate interests above the interests of their constituents. There were a number of great candidates in all of these races, really, both statewide and in delegate races as well. So we had to make some hard decisions about who we would support. And we do that through a pretty exhaustive questionnaire and an interview process, and also just looking how campaigns are running, who has a chance to succeed. And then we make those calls and our funding follows.
So you mentioned your endorsements for the governor's race and for the attorney general's race, but one race where you did not make an endorsement was for lieutenant governor. And in fact, there were several Democratic candidates who were Clean Virginia approved instead. That's Sam Rasool, Mark Levine, Sean Perryman, and also, until recently, Delegate Hala Ayala. Could you walk me through what happened with her and why that sort of approval was pulled?
Sure. Yeah. The lieutenant governor's races, we were really blessed with a wealth of riches in terms of candidates who had been very strong on our issues. And so we did not select one particular candidate for an endorsement, but essentially, as you said, had candidates that were approved by Clean Virginia and who received some campaign finance support from us as well. Delegate Hala Ayala was one of those. She had a track record of many years of not taking money from utility monopolies like Dominion Energy. Unfortunately, as a lot of folks know, she went back on that commitment in the last few days of the race and received a large contribution from Dominion Energy that allowed her to continue that campaign that she ran in the last few days. So we were very disappointed in that. I think anytime that a candidate, makes a strong commitment to an issue, whether it be taking money from regulated monopolies or any other issue, and then runs a campaign for a long time on that, and then turns it back on that commitment, it's a real cause for concern. Nevertheless, she did win the race. And we certainly hope that, as she campaigns and moves to November, if she wins in the general, that her the role that she plays in Virginia's government will be one that does not reflect the kind of influence Dominion had and brought to bear in the primary.
So beyond just the sort of executive offices, there were also some losses for progressives in the legislature, notably delegates Lee Carter and Ibrahim Samirah. Given sort of all of these results, broadly speaking, what does it all say about Virginia and its progressive moment? Where are we right now?
Well, we again look at these elections through the prism of the influence of regulated monopolies, and I think first and foremost there was a very positive story in that 13 of the Democratic primary candidates refused contributions from Dominion. They won their races. This is a stance and a position that not long ago, was considered political self-sabotage. Just 3 or 4 years ago, there was only 2 or 3 people that did not take money from the utilities that they were supposed to regulate. So this has become a very much a standard bearer of the Democratic Party. And so, we were very heartened to see that. And even the statewide candidates, except for Hala Ayala, both Governor McAuliffe and Attorney General Herring ran on not taking money from those regulated utilities. So we are very glad to see the political stances on these issues has changed significantly over the past few years. We also saw a candidate that we supported in a delegate race down in the Portsmouth area, Nadarius Clark, who is going to be one of the youngest delegates ever, a 26-year-old community organizer. He unseated a longtime incumbent there, Delegate Steve Heretic, who had been one of Dominion's fiercest allies, and that was a race where I think we saw a very new vision and view on what representation looks like. But as you said, we've seen names that we've seen before. I think the results certainly show the power of the incumbency. And that's the case with Governor McAuliffe, with Mark Herring as well. But again, I think by and large, this was a very good process for the Democratic Party, and we saw in candidates' platforms and positions evolution, a significant evolution on issues of climate, on an environment, but other issues as well from just a few years ago.
What role have activist groups like Clean Virginia, what role kind of have they played in the political process, and what role do you see them playing going forward to future races?
I think Virginia has a very strong set of social welfare and activist organizations who have a very important voice in the electoral process, which fuses, of course, with the policy process, because we see a lot of ideas, of policy ideas, how these candidates would govern, be developed during the campaign season. And activist groups and non-governmental organizations really do a lot to both bring good ideas to the table, promote those good ideas, and then hold candidates accountable once they're in office. So I think, we look a lot at the role of regular Virginians and citizens in the governance process compared to large corporations who often have an undue influence and an ability to control and manipulate the policy process more than average citizens. I think the activist groups, by and large, are more objective representatives of the interests of average Virginians than our giant corporations. So I'm quite heartened to see that these groups continue to play a strong role in the democratic process, including throughout the electoral season.
Mm-hmm. What is Clean Virginia going to be up to in the next few months as we ramp up to the general election in November?
So we have a primary endorsement process and a general election season endorsement process as well. So we're moving very much into that, looking at candidates in the general election. Of course, we support all candidates that refuse money from Dominion Energy and Appalachian Power and who don't own stock in those companies. But then we look at races that are particularly tight and where one candidate is very good on these issues and another candidate isn't. And we provide campaign financing beyond our standard contributions in those races. So we'll be going through that endorsement process and then moving forward to support, again, candidates who have a vision and view of what their role is in government that echoes our own.
Any sort of last thoughts on the topic? Anything we haven't hit so far that you want to talk about?
Yeah, just the last thing I'd like to say is that, Clean Virginia congratulates everyone that won their primary races. Even, there's a number of races where we supported a losing candidate. But at the end of the day, I think that what we've seen over time is progress across the board on making Virginia's system of government more representative, again, of the common interests and less of corporate interests. And we saw those conversations play out in the primary, and we certainly expect that the winners of these races, as they move towards November, will continue to make progress on those issues.
Brennan Gilmore is the Executive Director of Clean Virginia, an advocacy organization that works at the nexus of clean government and clean energy. Thanks to him and journalist Peter Galaska for joining us this week. My name's Nathan Moore, and I'm the host of Bold Dominion. Big thanks, as always, to our producer, Aryan Balu. Find this show online at bolddominion.org. And hey, we're always on the lookout for topics for future episodes. You can send your ideas to our email address, bolddominion@virginia.edu. That's bolddominion@virginia.edu. You can direct message us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram if that's your thing instead. I'll talk to you again in 2 short weeks.